I think the thing about my new system that I created is that it really just forced me to stay honest, and it forced me to put in, how do I put this? I guess just a more consistent baseline level of hours per day.
It was so great to connect with today's guest. It's a topic that I love to talk about, and what a great person. You're really going to enjoy this one. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're talking today with Brendan Fitzgerald, who has come up with a super cool audition strategy that we get into here. He has been a member of the St. Louis Symphony since the fall of 2019. Before that, he spent 2 seasons playing with the Seattle Symphony, and he's set to do a trial with the Minnesota Orchestra whenever trials happen during this pandemic. We'll see. So we talked through his audition prep method extensively, and Brendan actually passed along several recordings of excerpts and his solo Bach for a mock audition round coming up before one of his successful auditions. So this gives you an idea of the level that people are playing at when they're winning auditions. Very cool. I love it. And by the way, we talk about a podcast that Brendan was on with Ryan Beach. I have that linked up in the show notes. Definitely worth a listen. And they go into similar topics, but in a different vein. Without further ado, let me bring you Brendan Fitzgerald. And so I was listening to that podcast, and you were making me hungry because you kept on talking about barbecue.
Yes.
That was funny. Like getting barbecue for the audition, and like not checking the meat, lifting the grill cover all the time. And I was actually listening to that and sitting outside at my grill, so I was having kind of a nice serendipitous moment.
That's perfect.
No.
Yeah, if you ain't looking, you
Yeah. Now you went to Northwestern, right?
I did, yeah.
Well, okay. So when were you there?
I went in 2009. I went to Northwestern to study with Peter Lloyd, and then he actually left towards the end of my freshman year to take the job at Colburn. And then we had Rob Kassinger from the Chicago Symphony and Jeff Braditich in to teach for a year. And then they hired Andy Ricidi, who plays in the Milwaukee Symphony. And I stuck around at Northwestern for an extra 2 years. So I got a full, 4-year cycle with Andy.
That's awesome. I was wondering what time period that was in exactly, but that's great. Now I love Andy, and it was
during one of the. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the shifts. Yeah. So you weren't there for the new building though, right? That came after you?
Yeah, I believe I was in Civic, and I was still coming around and checking out some bass classes and taking lessons with Andy and stuff. Just as the building was being finished, I played in the Civic Orchestra for years after Northwestern, and I actually recorded my Civic audition tape with another DePaul bass player, Brett Wagner, you probably know. We went in and recorded our audition tapes in the new Galvin recital, or is it Galvin? The recital hall at Northwestern now that looks over the down to, it has that window with Chicago skyline in the background. We managed to kind of sneak in through the bottom of the building while it was still under construction and record our tapes on stage in that hall, which was a lot of fun.
Wow.
So just barely.
I haven't made it into that hall. I've seen lots of photos of that hall, and I was watching. I lived in Evanston. I wonder if our paths ever crossed back in Chicago, because I became a townie for a while in Evanston. We just lived up by the football stadium, and I would go running through the campus and that kind of stuff. And so I didn't leave. And then we lived in Chicago for a while. Actually, while you were there, we were living in the city. But then I came back to Evanston because I was working a job in the north suburbs, and that was the last place I lived in Chicago until moving out to California. And you're from California, right? Aren't you from like San Diego or area?
I am indeed. Yeah, I grew up in Coronado in San Diego, and my first classical bass teacher there was Travis Gore, who now plays in the Seattle Symphony, which is where I got my first long-term professional experience.
Man, small world. Is Coronado is the city of Coronado, is that on Coronado Island? Is that like amazing?
It is the island, yeah.
Oh man, what a fun! My wife and I went and did a beer weekend in San Diego about a year ago, actually. And if you're going to pick a city to do that, you could do worse than San Diego. Oh my god! And so we took the ferry over to Coronado Island and walked over to that. I got the most expensive Diet Coke I've ever gotten in my life at that really fancy hotel. I remember
the Hotel Del Coronado.
Yeah, exactly. I handed them a $5 for like a 12-ounce can, and they just sat there looking at me, and I was like, "Oh, I guess it's more." And so, but yeah, what a gorgeous place to grow up, and
I was very lucky, very very lucky.
Okay, so how had you spent a lot of time in the Midwest? Because now you've been, playing in St. Louis. Now you went to school in Chicago. Was the Midwest a new thing for you, or?
Sort of. My mom's family is from all around Detroit, so I've been, to Michigan quite a bit. And my dad has been a huge fan of the Chicago Symphony. He's a trumpet player, and so he has been flying out to Chicago to see the orchestra ever since, before I went to school there or anything. So I had a little bit of connection with the Midwest. And then I actually went to Interlochen for my senior year of high school. So I had a trial by fire and then stayed in the Midwest for the next 8 years.
So you know what you were getting into. If you spent a full year at Interlochen and you went through a Michigan winter, Chicago is it probably felt like moving to a tropical climate compared to it's funny because I grew up in South Dakota, and for me, Chicago was, people complain about the Chicago weather, but it was a relief for me.
Yeah, it's a total relief. Yeah. I think South Dakota and Jackson Hole are like the two coldest places I've been in the United States. I drove through briefly on some road trip, and each of those places were unbelievably cold and with like 50-mile-per-hour winds.
Well, South Dakota. It's funny because you look at a map of typical winter weather climates, and you always see this Arctic bubble descending over Minneapolis, and where I'm from, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So you're always a solid chunk of a solid 10 degrees colder, maybe more. So yeah, I don't miss that at all. My mother listens to this podcast, so I have to say South Dakota is a lovely place, and she lets me know if I ever say anything disparaging about South Dakota. Nothing disparaging.
Corn Palace.
Yeah,
Corn Palace.
The Corn Palace. So the Corn Palace, our all-state orchestras were held at the Corn Palace, and if anybody is not familiar with the Corn Palace, which is probably most people, it's in this town of about 10,000 people, and it's just this very modest Midwestern town, and all of a sudden you get to downtown, and this giant, seriously, palace of corn with cupolas and everything rises up on the main street, and that's the third Corn Palace because the first two burned down because they built them all of corn, and then they realized, oh, we need to build it of stone and then just decorate it with corn. And so, but yeah, that's
it's hilarious.
Well, so speaking of cold climates in Minnesota and everything, congrats on getting is it a trial with Minnesota, which is obviously things are all up in the air with the pandemic, but congratulations to
Thank you.
Doing a trial. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, so me and another guy were both offered trial weeks. He already completed his last season, and mine were supposed to be in April, although obviously that did not happen. And now we're kind of in the process of rescheduling them, although trying to look, later in the next season because no one really knows what's happening. So, yeah, the process is still very much ongoing, but hopefully there will be an answer. I just feel bad for the other guy. I mean, he played his trials like a year ago now, and he has to keep waiting.
Yeah, what a weird situation. And I had that moment. Now, I haven't. Orchestral jobs are not something I'm thinking about at this point in my life, certainly. But I look in the union paper, and I've never experienced like opening up and it's like one page of a couple things that haven't been canceled yet, and then like 7 pages of just everything that's been canceled. So it's a weird time for auditions, but surely auditions will be coming back. And I really enjoyed going through. And remind me the name of the trumpet player, Ryan Bach.
Ryan Beach.
Ryan Beach. Okay. So cool podcast. And I will link up to your episode of that. And it was really interesting. And I love the way that he laid out you also, and the show notes had all these pages of your journal, your practice journal, right? And I was really enjoying going through that and sort of seeing how you laid things out and your X5 for your repetitions and that kind of thing. And it was really interesting. So, and I have so I'd love to talk about that, but maybe, how did a good spot to start? And folks should go and listen to Ryan's podcast with you, because it's really cool. And it's not just, any bass player would enjoy it, whether or not they're taking auditions, but, you'd had success prior to coming up with the system. So maybe just talk about, we talked about Northwestern a bit, maybe talk about time after Chicago and then taking auditions. And I know you sort of came up with this system that you used for, I'm guessing, St. Louis and Minnesota, if not other auditions. Yeah. So just talk about how that process evolved.
In the past, I had a moderate degree of success. I advanced in my first audition. I made finals in Detroit in I think my fourth audition. And then after that, I took another 20 or so before I won one. And I had, like I said, varying degrees of success. I made a couple finals. I advanced pretty frequently, but I also had cold streaks. I went, I think, 5 auditions in a row without advancing. And basically, what spurred me to create this new system was that I took I was on a 1-year position in the Seattle Symphony on my second 1 year, and they had an audition for the spot that I was currently filling, and I didn't win it. The guy who won is absolutely amazing, Will Langley Miladich, fantastic musician and really just fun guy. couldn't be happier for him. But anyway, I had a very definite expiration date on my employment. And so I wanted to create a system that would just be a little more foolproof. And I think the thing about my new system that I created is that it really just forced me to stay honest, and it forced me to put in, how do I put this? I guess just a more consistent baseline level of hours per day in practice. It's very easy for me, and as I'm sure it is for many people, to practice an hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 or 5, and then feel like you're done, feel like you've accomplished quite a bit and you've done your practice for the day, and you can, put the instrument away and go about living your life. I'm really good at doing that. That part of practice is very easy for me. Say I've done a lot, So this system basically just forced me to not be able to put the bass away until I was actually ready to put it away each day. And also it offered a much, much greater degree of consistency. While the process that I'll go into more details about the nuts and bolts of it, it I think raised my ceiling. It raised the overall level of artistic expression and, technical achievement, however you want to say it. I think it did raise the ceiling, but what it did more than anything is it greatly raised my floor. If I had a bad round or if I had a bad rep, it wasn't really that bad. Whereas in previous auditions and in previous preparation methods, I might have an amazing take, and then if I played that same excerpt again right away, it may be just atrocious, unrecognizable. So this was a way of just codifying my practice and keeping myself honest, I think. So do you want me to talk about really the very sort of detailed nuts and bolts, numbers, et cetera?
Yeah. I love nerding out on stuff like this because I was listening to. Okay, good. Well, this will be fun because you were describing the way I've been trying to work up this Flight of the Bumblebee arrangement that I agreed to do for some reason, and so I have been practicing the way that you described. That is not the system that you're now describing, where I sort of like start each day at like half tempo and bring it up, and yeah, you had this beautiful approach, which I have chatted with. It's been a few years, but I've chatted with several people who've done quite well at auditions about, which is more of like this like slow ramp up. So get as many specifics as the more the better.
Sure. Okay. So when I started, I split up my whatever list it was. Actually, you know what? I think a little rewind. Aside from needing to create the system to just ensure, give myself a better chance of success, I forgot actually the first reason why I did something like this is because I was planning on taking the Chicago Symphony audition, for which the audition list was 3 to 4 times as long as anything I had prepared before. And this includes, title chairs in San Francisco and Montreal, Los Angeles, Philly. Really great orchestras. And Chicago's list was easily twice as long as any of them.
Wow. And
so I just didn't know how to get through it. I had experienced in the past, as I'm sure everyone has, showing up to an audition or a performance and having something that is in my wheelhouse, like, Mozart 40 or Beethoven 5, something I've played thousands of times, and then it just goes very, very poorly in the audition. And so I was wary about that happening with things that I was not familiar with. If I couldn't trust myself to play the things that I was really, really comfortable with at a very high level consistently, how could I do that with all these random licks? Basically, it was all complete works on the Chicago list. And so, I'm the type of person that if there's a complete work on a list, maybe I'm not going to have the passage of separate quarter notes be as polished and meticulously prepared as the quote unquote licks, but I'm still going to work it up so that I'm never sight reading. Whatever they ask in the audition, I'm not sight reading, right? So I needed to create just some system to keep myself honest, to organize this much music. I believe it was 40 or 45 pages of music for this audition. So I set up my system. I split up the list into 3 parts, actually, because this was, again, biggest list I'd ever done. And I started by assigning myself 5 repetitions at 50% tempo. And during these repetitions, I would be striving for not only, great pitch, rhythm, beautiful sound, but ingraining all the colors, shapes, vibrato choice, sense of phrasing, dynamic contrast, pacing, everything that I want my music to sound like at performance tempo. I was trying to build that in from the most basic starting place. I think I remember David Moore, his analogy for this, as I think I heard Ian say it, is paint the floor. While you're building the walls, while you're building the floors, you're painting the walls as well. Something like that.
I like that.
Much more eloquently put by him, I believe. But basically just trying not to leave anything other than full tempo performance for the last week. So I worked through this process. I gave myself a mandated day off every Monday. I did not touch the bass. I did not think about music other than, listening to songs I enjoy. And then 6 days out of the week, I was practicing 5 to 6 hours a day, in addition to the 7 and 8 service weeks with the Seattle Symphony. So after about 6 weeks of this, where I would start, like I said, 5 reps at 50% tempo. And if I need to sort of stop at a couple points and clarify a few things. If something didn't go well, if I blew some shift, or there was a crunchy note or an unclear string crossing or something, if it happened once, my tendency would be to let it go. If it happened again, then I would stop and go in and floss that individual shift or string crossing or whatever the technical issue was. But part of this 5 reps thing was just building in performance practice, building in starting an excerpt and playing it start to finish with really careful coordination throughout the entire process. So 5 reps at 50% tempo, and then over 3 days, do the entire list. And then for the next 3 days, I bumped it to 55% tempo. And then 1 day off. And then the next week, again, 60% tempo for 3 days, 65, etc. Moving it up to about 90 or 95. I don't have the one answer, the one exact way to do this method. I just, there's a little degree of freedom with how far you want to take it. And, you could even, I guess, do 50%, 52.5%. You can go in smaller increments, larger, however you want. But I found a good degree of success with 5% increments. For, I believe with the Chicago audition, it was about 6 weeks of buildup and then a week and a half or close to 2 weeks of mock auditions and run-throughs and spot checks. So after this long buildup, I would, for about 2 days before playing for other people, I would play for myself. So I'd turn the recorder on, run the list or run half of the list maybe, and then go back, listen to that recording and take detailed notes. And this is, I shared some of these pages with in Ryan's podcast where you can see exactly the types of notes I'm taking in the last week. And I would just listen back through the entire thing, listen, take notes, and then practice each of those notes. So I basically saved my sort of minutia practice for the last week rather than front loading that and then trying to run things for weeks and weeks. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I love it. You mentioned recording, playing for yourself and recording during the build-up process. Did you record at all? Was that like a regular thing you worked in?
Actually, no. I probably should have. I'm sure it would have been incredibly useful to record those slow runs and hear what things I may not be aware of that are sticking out or that sound, a little disjunct. So that probably would have been a really good idea. And I might do that in the future when I prepare another recital or something. But I didn't. I waited. A part of why I didn't record is because for each of these run-throughs, I had the metronome on. And as people will see from my notes, I often had a drone on too. So I wasn't really mimicking live performance. I had 2 or 3 various tools kind of keeping me on track. And so the last week was where I found out how everything worked in isolation, how well I could maintain my pitch center without a drone, how well I could maintain my pulse without a metronome, and then keep all the same musical choices, phrasings and such that I had built in from the low tempo. So I did actually wait to record until the first day of that run through phase. And I think part of the reason why I did that is because this was a new process for me. And I was very interested to see what would happen if I didn't, if you ain't, if you're looking, you ain't cooking thing. I had the tendency in the past to be running things too early, basically. I'd play something at tempo and then decide what I needed to practice rather than doing it backwards, working things up very slow. And then once it's at tempo, deciding what to practice or deciding now what actually needs to be practiced. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think I basically didn't record because I was really interested to see what would happen if I just really committed to a process and trusted that process over a long period of time.
No, it's cool. And it's a tough thing to do, to not like just barrel through excerpts. And I think it's the term I remember Robin Kesselman talking about many years ago. But the other thing that I think is really cool, and I know people do this, but I love that you gave yourself a day off. And Monday makes sense. Anybody who's played in an orchestra, that's your standard day off anyway. And just like totally unplugging. I find that really helpful for me creatively. Like I don't work on the weekends unless I'm subbing in San Francisco Symphony or something. I just like don't think about it, shut it down. So probably mentally it was helpful, but also, and you mentioned on Ryan's podcast, physically, right? Like bass is not, it's a physical instrument.
Yeah. During this Chicago prep, and then I'll talk about it, but I basically adapted the same process for a shorter time period for my next 2 auditions. It was by far the most I had practiced for a consistent period of time ever in my life. Coming into it, I was in great shape because I was, I had come off of the heels of 20-something auditions and was in the middle of working a full-time job. So I was in pretty good physical shape, bass playing wise. But it was still, I ended every day a little sore. No pain. I always made sure to listen to my body and take breaks if I needed to. And I never bordered on anything with real serious tension or pain. But I was definitely a little sore at the end of the day. I mean, if you run a marathon, like, it doesn't matter how good of shape you're in, your legs are going to be sore afterwards. And so I was a little tired at the end of, I was exhausted mentally and physically at the end of each day. And so then Monday was my recoup day, both mentally and physically, so that Tuesday morning when I go in and try to get in an hour and a half before our 10 a.m. rehearsals, I'd be really, really fresh and get some great work done.
I was wondering, as you're describing this, in terms of the 5 to 6 hours, the actual structure and taking breaks, did you run like a Pomodoro timer? Did you just do an excerpt, take a break? How did that work? Because obviously that's a lot of sustained playing.
Yeah, well, I think actually this was another benefit of the process, is because I was chunking out my practice into this, 5 reps on each excerpt, I had a very definite stopping point where I would, play an excerpt, take a couple seconds in between, reset my body and brain, et cetera. But then after the 5 reps or however many reps I was targeting for that excerpt, I'd put the bass down. And this is actually, it probably would have been more efficient if ahead of time I took out my calculator and my notebook and, wrote my goal tempos for each of my excerpts for that day. But I actually did it in between practicing excerpts. So that was my kind of my break, is I would run 5 or, do 5 runs of an excerpt, and then take out my calculator, go, 5 times whatever my click was, find out my tempo for my next excerpt, write it down, and then sit back down in the stool. So that would be like a 3 or 4 minute break between excerpts. And then I'd probably take a bigger break every hour or so. It's different for every person. I really try to just listen to my hands, listen to my body. But the only way that I was able to make it work, and I know brass players have a lot of experience with this, is I basically just had to practice all day. And that doesn't mean nonstop all day, but it means I had to break my practice up throughout a day, starting at 8 a.m., ending at 11 p.m. or so. So I would go to the hall, or wake up, breakfast, coffee, go to the hall, practice for an hour, hour and a half or so, finish around 9:30 so I could take a little break before our 10 a.m. rehearsal. And then after that rehearsal was done, I'd get a little lunch and then do an afternoon session. If we didn't have a double, I'd play maybe 2 hours or so, and then go home, take a nap, come back to the hall and do another evening session. So I was probably breaking my practice up into hour or 2 hour chunks. And then within those hour and 2 hour chunks, I definitely took breaks every 5 to 20 minutes. I was taking a 2 to 5 minute break or so.
Right, and then that's a great setup because you're by spacing out throughout the day. I mean, it's like you're training for the Olympics, what you're describing, and I remember talking to Max Dimoff about this somewhere relatively recently, but like by doing, I think we were talking about about taking auditions when you had a lot of other things going on in your life, like having a job or having kids, and you got that evening session, then you have a morning session. Well, you have reduced the amount of time where you're not at the base, so like you're enhancing the learning, and then that one day off, like that's where a lot of the coalescing of everything you've done probably happens. You get your brain off, get your body moving in a little bit different way, and then you come back to it, and those subconscious, that myelination, which I also heard you reference, which is a fascinating concept for people who aren't familiar with. But so that's a really intelligent way to go. Away from the bass, I think I saw like the word "run" appear in your journal, or maybe I was imagining things.
Those were not jogs.
Not jogs. Those were runs. Okay, I was curious. Like, does he go for a run and then come back and do Beethoven 5? Okay.
Oh, that is. I remember when I sent that to Ryan's blog. I was reading through those pages and I thought, this seems like the last. I know a lot of people are very into jogging. I wonder if people are going to think that this is a run. Yeah, that was a run of half of the list or the whole list or something. Yeah.
That shows you how infrequently I practice runs of excerpts, that my brain would go there. But
that shows how infrequently I jog, that I write run and it means something else.
Well, I think something that trips a lot of people up, certainly did for me, is as you're building up for it, trying to like come up with some special routine or different day. I mean, to this day, I can't eat bananas because I think I'm going to go take an audition. And I think I heard you mentioning that just doing things that make you happy more. Like what do you do in terms of maybe like your audition week or the day of the event, or like do you do anything special? Do you just try to keep going with life as normal? Like how does that all work for you?
Yeah, I try to treat myself a little bit. There's so much stress and anxiety and oftentimes just negativity and tension that goes into an audition. I try to do something to lighten the mood. So, when I'm not practicing, I'll do some research and score study and listening, but mostly when I'm not on the bass, when I'm doing this type of prep, at the hall all day practicing, when the bass is not in my hands, I am not thinking about music. I'm trying to just enjoy life and, dive into hobbies that I find enjoyable, frisbee golfing, video games, whatever floats your boat. But for the actual week of the audition, I would, like I said, try to treat myself. The last week as I was doing run-throughs and mock auditions, I definitely curbed the number of hours I was playing just a little bit, so that I felt really physically fresh on the day of the audition. And I would almost always, the night before the audition, treat myself to a meal that I probably shouldn't. It's a little too expensive. Yeah, which not everyone has, is able to do that. And I definitely did it sometimes when I maybe shouldn't have. But, for the amount of money that you're going to spend getting to an audition, plane tickets, putting your bass on the plane, hotels, Ubers to and from airports, all that, I figure it's worth spending a little extra to just put myself in a great headspace. And for other people, maybe, I don't know, eating a bologna sandwich that costs 20 cents puts you in the best headspace. Everyone has something different. And so I don't want to offer a one-size-fits-all prescription for feeling good. You just have to do whatever you like. And for me, that's eating some great food and maybe enjoying my favorite TV show or something.
It sounds like a good. I'm right on board with you. That sounds like a good a good way to do it. How about the day of the audition? What are you doing? You get to the hall. What are you doing? Are you running things in the practice room? Are you just chilling out? And what's that look like?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I actually have a pretty, well, I wouldn't say one of a kind, but I think it's a relatively unique practice room approach. So leading up to the audition, during all this prep, I don't do a very, I would say, regimented or thoughtful warm-up. I basically take the bass out, rosin the bow, make sure my bow tension is good and, my bass is in tune, and then I just start going. And so on the day of the audition, that is the first time that I allow myself a true meditative warm up. So every time I touch the bass on the day of the audition, it's a special moment for me. I wake up, I get some coffee and a shower, and then I'll take the bass out in my hotel room and just play mezzo forte, mezzo piano, just something comfortable, and just kind of move around. Play some slow scales, play some medium speed scales, go through one or two of my solos with a drone under tempo, just to kind of, it's the first thing that the audition committee is going to hear. Just make sure that the first thing they hear is something relatively in tune. And then in the warm up, so I try to stay close to the bass, but really I don't run anything the day of the audition. I trust that over the last 2 months, I've already run things hundreds of times. In the last week, I've got enough good mock auditions and runs in my memory bank that I'm not going to get any better the day of the audition. I'd be fooling myself if I said I would. So I'm just trying to focus on letting myself feel as good as possible so that the product is as beautiful as it can be. And in the warm-up room, in the hour before the audition, I will practice my starts and ends, because up to that point, I've basically practiced. If I've done my job well, I've practiced everything that I'm going to practice or everything that I'm going to play in the audition, aside from the round in its exact order. And so here is where I practice, put the music on the stand, take a deep breath, do everything I do to hear the music before I start. And then I'll start it and then just kind of fizzle out a few bars in, jump to the end, finish the excerpt, and then behave exactly as I would on stage. Either, whether the screen is up or down, I try to, act in the same way, move calmly, quietly, no crazy rustling pages or stomping around or anything. So yeah, in the warm-up room, I just try to go through those transitions. The one thing that I haven't actually done that the audition is asking me to do, I do a few times in the warm-up room beforehand. And then, I go out and feel as good as I can. So I end up finding with this process that I perform, I'd say my best in the audition, because leading up to that, I haven't, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Basically, I just leave the perfect warm-up and the greatest feeling of confidence and calm and self-love for the day of the audition, so that it's like an out-of-body experience. Wow, how can I play this well? Because I'm actually warmed up and calm and confident. Maybe that's a little silly, but I found it made me feel good about what I was doing.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. It's a great process. It's really cool. And I love that you kept all those notes. I love looking through sort of seeing how people structure their preparation, and it's really cool. We should have this be the first of many chats. We could talk about a lot of other things. In person would be even better. So whether it's Minnesota or St. Louis or San Diego or somewhere soon, I'd love to do a round two on this or other topics. Cool, man.
Sure.
Anything
Yeah.
else
Was there anything?
anything else you want to get out there since we're on the about preparation process? Or I mean, here's one question. You brought up David Allen Moore. So let me ask a Dave Moore question, which is that we see, and I think this is when I was taught. I love talking to people who have done well in auditions. And I love talking to people in all sorts of different areas. I had a period of time where I was talking to a whole bunch of, there were like just a bunch of bass auditions being won, and I was talking to a lot of folks, and Dave said, you're seeing people's highlight reel, I'm paraphrasing, but with something like this, but everybody's got a low point that they've gone through, and you learn so much in the struggles, and I imagine possibly a low point or a challenging point was when you didn't get to the finals for that Seattle Symphony job. So if it's that or pick anything, anything really, how did you, because everybody goes through a funk. We're all kind of going through like a career and existential funk right at the moment. So like, if you just think back to any moment really, like how do you dig yourself out of a rough patch?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the two roughest patches, I guess, since we're talking about auditions, kind of the most relevant area of my life. One was when I didn't advance for 5 auditions in a row. And that sounds so just callous and heartless to say that was my low point. But I have to explain, it was because I had done pretty well leading up to then in my first, I think like 10 auditions or so. And so it was kind of alarming that suddenly I was not getting out of the first round in auditions where the orchestra pays less than auditions in which I had advanced. And so I was confused and didn't know, am I still good at bass? What's happening? And honestly, I think the thing that pulled me out of it, there was nothing that really pulled me out of it. I just kind of kept going. The audition circuit, as much as anything, is just a test of perseverance and stick-to-itiveness and, how much gravel can you get thrown in your face before you close your eyes and turn away. I mean, the audition circuit is totally brutal, and it is not anything that I would wish for anyone to go through, but it's what all of us have had to go through to win a job. So there was no real change there. I just kept working. I just kept trying to work a little harder each time, record more, play for more people, take more lessons. I was driving out to Detroit to play for Kevin Brown in Detroit a lot. And so, I'd spend 9 hours driving in a day for a 2 or 3 hour lesson. I mean, just really putting everything I could into the bass, and eventually things started, turning around. And then the other low point would be, after I didn't win the job that I had been doing for 2 years. I was, incredibly upset, was devastated. I mean, I'd really started to call that place home, and, really just loved my colleagues and bass section members and the city, the environment. It was great. So I was understandably very upset when I didn't win the job, or when I didn't make finals even. And I think that was really the kick in the ass that I needed. I mean, part of it was the Chicago audition was so intimidating, and I needed something that would let me feel good about taking that audition. But then the other part of it was that I had just lost this audition that I had been basically gearing up for 2 years. Ever since I started at Seattle, I knew there would be an opening, and I knew I wanted it. And, I tried really hard for it. But what I had to tell myself after each audition that I lost, and I think this is important, a lot of people don't do this, is I told myself, honestly, you didn't work as hard as you could. And for some people, they do work as hard as they can, and then it doesn't work out. And I've had that happen. There have been auditions where I've worked as hard as I could, it didn't work out. But with most of them, I could have done something a little smarter. I could have, there were times where I allowed myself a day off because I was feeling burned out or I was feeling tired. But with this process that I designed for Chicago and then for St. Louis and Minnesota, I did not allow myself to take a day off just because I felt like it. If I felt pain or tension or something, yeah, of course I would stop. but I didn't stop just because I felt a little down or demoralized. It's like when you get tired in mile 14 of the marathon, like there's 12 to go and you just got to keep running.
That might be the quote for the beginning of the episode right there. That's a good one. Cool, man. That's great. Thank you so much for chatting. This is you have been, I keep this lit. People recommend people to me, and have for a long time. And I just, anytime someone mentions a name, I put them on a list, and then that got moved into a spreadsheet, and then I lost the spreadsheet and started another list. And you have been recommended many, many, many times. So let's have this be the first of many. That'd be great. And
I love it.
If who knows how long we're all going to be locked up, in St. Louis or California, ever. But if you find yourself out here at any point, just let me know, and I'll love to take you out for a beer here or wherever. So
I definitely like beer.
Hey, I finally started brewing beer again because I'd gotten rid of all my stuff when I moved to California because our place was just so small. But about 3 weeks ago, I was like, okay,
it's time. It is time.
It is time. Brendan, thank you for chatting. Folks, check out that other podcast that Brendan was on that we were talking about. That's linked up to in the show notes. And yeah, let's do it again soon, either in St. Louis or here in San Francisco or over Zoom again or some other locale. That would be great. Thank you for listening to this. I love connecting with people who are taking auditions at a high level. I think it's super interesting. Whether or not you are auditioning, I think there's a lot to learn from someone who has figured out a process like this. I am certainly not taking auditions, but I took so much inspiration from this talk, and I've been applying what I was talking about with Brendan to my own practicing, which has been very fun. By the way, I've been doing these goofy videos on YouTube where I strap a GoPro to my head and I practice through Dennis Whitaker's incredibly useful exercises. I'm going through all 16 volumes. If you want to check that out, just check out my YouTube channel. That's linked up to on contrabassconversations.com, or just search for Contrabass Conversations in YouTube or Jason Heath, and you will find it. Let me know what you think. It's been weirdly fun. It's actually a lot easier to do that than to do one of these podcasts. There's so many moving parts to podcasting. I forget about that. Folks, if you're going to start something, start a YouTube channel. Don't start a podcast. I welcome anybody doing a podcast, but oh my goodness, it is so much more work than you might realize. But it is also incredibly satisfying. And talking with somebody like Brendan here today, it's a ton of fun. It's great to see it come out into the world, and it's great to know that people are listening to this. And I love hearing from people. I hear from people every single day, and it still astonishes me that people are listening and then would take time out of their day to write in. So if you ever want to share anything or have a guest recommendation or a topic recommendation, feedback@contrabassconversations.com is the email. Boy, it sounds like I've had a lot of coffee. I actually haven't. I'm just at the end of a long day of podcast editing. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, Mitch Mooring, and Krista Copper. And if you are looking for a new bass or you need some work done to your bass, Mitch is doing great work in East Texas. Is that the part of Texas you call it? It's east of Dallas-Fort Worth, about 2 hours or so. Kilgore, Texas. I'm going with East Texas. Super cool, award-winning luthier. Check him out at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.